Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
On behalf of the Harvard Law School Library, I want to thank you all for coming. So wonderful to see Tree's family here for a whole day to honor and celebrate the life and work of Charles Ogletree. When I was in junior high school, people might be binge watching MASH or Saint Elsewhere, good times. For me, I was binge watching The Constitution, that delicate balance on PBS, and was imprinted as a young duckling with Charlie Nesson owning a room, a horseshoe full of high mucky mucks, and Charles Ogletree doing the same in his sessions. The gravitas that they brought, the quick thinking on their feet, the gentle, even playful at times, puncturing of pretension that they offered was for me a sort of siren's call, like a moth to a flame, to Harvard Law School. And I spent time here as a student and then later as employee number one at what would become the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. Apparently Charlie Nesson didn't tell the school that I was coming or had been hired and simply drew a line down the middle of his office, his faculty office, and me and my fish tank were on one side and he was on the other. And whenever I had a hard problem, I asked Charlie for advice. Whenever Charlie had a hard problem, he asked Tree for advice. And the opportunity to see that relationship in action, and to myself, when I had a really, really hard problem, an opportunity to talk to Tree, to see not only was there the gravity and the playfulness, but a wisdom that I don't know where it comes from, but it was a beacon. And that opportunity to see those dynamics in play, to see what Tree offered to so many people. For so many people, he was the person they turned to when they had their hardest problems. It's just such a gift. And I feel so fortunate to have even taken in just a little bit of it. So throughout the day today, I know we'll hear from others who similarly had a chance to be in communion with an orbit of Tree, and just wonderful to be in communion here and share in that. So thank you very much for coming today, and I now turn things over to Dean John Goldberg to open up the next panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good morning and welcome. I am John Goldberg, the Dean of Law School, and I'm delighted to join you all here today to mark this important occasion and to celebrate our dear colleague, Charles J. Ogletree. Let me begin by acknowledging Pam and Charles's, all the members of the Ogletree family who are here with us today on behalf of Harvard Law School and all those who will benefit from this collection. I want to express our gratitude for your support for Tree in his long and distinguished career and for this timely and hugely valuable project. Thank you. The Charles J. Ogletree Jr. Papers collection is unique. It includes 654 boxes of materials. For those of you who want that in linear feet, it's 566. It is the largest working papers collection for any faculty member in the history of Harvard Law School. To complete it, library staff from across Harvard collaborated to appraise, process, and digitize the materials. Thanks to their amazing efforts, the work was completed in only 3.5 years. That may sound like a lot, but in the archiving world, I'm told that is like running a marathon with 4-minute miles. But what really makes the collection unique is, of course, Tree himself and his countless contributions to the study and practice of law, to our community, and to the nation and the world. As you all know, he was a legendary criminal defense attorney, a champion for racial equality, and a beloved and respected educator. He endeavored to enlighten the perspective of others, expose injustice, and challenge all of us to put conscience into action. As the founder of the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice, he established a center for research, education, advocacy, and community engagement on questions of racial justice. Today, headed by Guy-Uriel Charles, the inaugural Charles J. Ogletree Jr. Professor of Law, the Institute remains a leading force for ensuring equal treatment, equal opportunity, and equal access to our system of democratic government. Tree also founded and nurtured the Criminal Justice Institute, CJI, which continues to be one of Harvard's most impactful and sought-after legal clinics. By serving persons accused of wrongdoing with steadfast advocacy from passionate experts in criminal law, CJI remains a bastion of the rule of law and equal justice. Tree contributed to HLS and legal education in so many other ways. In 1988, he founded what became known as the Saturday School, an HLS forum to support Black students and examine critical issues in the study of law. As President Barack Obama once recalled, and I quote, "Charles took time on weekends to run something called Saturday School for Black students who didn't necessarily have the support systems at home to get them through the difficult first years of law school. Eventually, Saturday School became so popular that students of every background began showing up to hear Charles explain things in a way they could understand. It was an example of the kind of person Charles has always been, unfailingly helpful and driven by a genuine concern for others," unquote. Tree, of course, was also a sought-after lawyer whose clients ranged from Anita Hill and Tupac Shakur to survivors of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, and whose advocacy helped achieve a unanimous victory for his client James Ford in Ford versus Georgia, a Supreme Court decision that expanded the ability of criminal defendants to challenge race-based preemptory challenges. He was also instrumental in raising apartheid awareness in South Africa, even helping to draft that country's constitution. This collection is a tribute to Tree's legacy, but it is more than that. It is a vital resource for anyone interested in forging new pathways to justice and meaningful social change. And starting today, it is fully accessible and available for anyone in the world to use. I am enormously proud of the incredible work of our library staff, and I'm beyond grateful to Tree's family for providing this incredible collection. And I'm eager to see his hugely positive impact on our world continue in perpetuity. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. I have both the enormous honor and the impossible task of trying to sort of summarize a discussion about what Tree has meant to Harvard Law School. Luckily, I don't have to do it alone. I have two incredible co-panelists here. I'll let them mostly introduce themselves, but Guy-Uriel Charles, who's already been mentioned, who is now the Charles J. Ogletree Professor of Law, which is a really thrilling thing for those of us who have known Tree since he was a law student, which I'll say a little bit more about, and also carrying on Tree's legacy at the Hamilton Institute in many other ways, and I'll have him talk about that. And the person without whom this event would, quite frankly, never have happened. And that's Julieanna Richardson, who I've also known since we were, actually I knew you before we went to Harvard Law School together when she was at Brandeis and I was at Harvard College, but who has really single-handedly not just preserved Tree's legacy, but preserved the legacy of countless other Black Americans, both the famous and those for whom no one would have ever known, but whose lives are such an integral part of our American story. And as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the birth of this country, we need to recognize that those stories are very much integral to the history that we celebrate this year. And I'll let her talk a little bit about that. Moreover, there are a lot of people in this room who do a lot about tree and who have wonderful tree stories, of which there are legion. And we want to make sure that we have a conversation that includes all. I've already teed up my former criminal law professor and colleague now for more than 40 years, Charles Nesson, who played an integral role in Tree's story, who's going to also help to broaden the conversation. So our goal really is to try to give those of you who knew Tree and those of you who didn't know Tree an opportunity to know him as a three-dimensional human being. Right? Obviously, there's a legend and a legacy, and we're going to talk about that. But, you know, he was way more than that. So I'm just going to start things off as the person on the panel here who I think probably on the panel at least knew Tree the longest, although Pam's here, who knew him the longest of the longest, because we were in law school together. He was 2 years ahead of me at Harvard Law School. He was class of 1978. And when I came here as a, frightened 1L, trying to figure out what this whole place was going to be about, Tree was one of the first people I met. And my guess is there are many people who had this similar experience. Because already, the dean talked about all the amazing things he would go on to do, but he was like a larger-than-life personality, a kind of legend already as a then third-year student. And he had been he'd been the president of BALSA, the Black Law Students Association. He'd been the national president. Maybe he was that year the national president of the Black Law Students Association. And he made it his business to make sure that first every incoming Black student, but eventually every student who came in who was looking for support and looking for a home could find it. For those of you who are students here, I don't have to tell you, and for those of you who have heard about this place, you probably know, this is a scary place. And, in 1977, when I arrived, it was a way scarier place, The paper chase had just been released a few years earlier. And, it wasn't entirely factual, but it was not entirely fiction either. And if you were coming here, especially if you were coming here feeling a little bit as an outsider, and that could have been for many reasons. It could have been because you were a member of a Black or racial minority group. It could be you were a first-generation law student. You didn't have parents who were lawyers. You were coming from some, obscure place like, Montana that no one had, most of the East Coast people here had never heard of. There were lots of ways. If you were a woman. When I came here, the number of women in our class was something like 20%, something like that. For those of you who are now here where women constitute a majority of the students at Harvard Law School, it's maybe a little hard to imagine what it was like to be a female student at Harvard Law School in the 1970s and how much you felt as an outsider. There was only one female tenured professor here when I started, and a few other junior people like the great Martha Minow, who had just been hired a couple of years beforehand. And Tree was sort of a beacon for all of those sorts of students because he was only 2 grades ahead of us, but he seemed so much more worldly, so much more confident, right? And, that confidence was not to the manner born, right? Tree came from as hard to scrabble a background as probably anybody at Harvard Law School that I knew. And yet somehow, and he never hid from that, and he never tried to cover it up. In fact, he embraced it. He was proud of where he came from in Merced and all the, challenges that he had, which he eventually wrote all about. But he somehow exuded a kind of confidence that allowed him to be someone other people, even who had less reason to feel nervous, my father went to Harvard Law School and I still felt nervous, and I still felt that he was somebody who you could gravitate to and make you feel that you could do this place. You could survive this place. Not only survive this place, Tree always was starting things, even as a student, whether that was around the Free South Africa protests, whether it's around advocacy for more Black faculty, whether it was around criminal justice and public defense. He was always someone who didn't just think, I'm just going to come here and survive. I'm going to actually come here and make a difference. I'm going to come here and actually try to change this place for the better. And he did that not just in the academic realm or even in the kind of law school organization way. He and a bunch of his buddies started a Black football team in the sort of intramural football league called the Black Plague, and they were immensely competitive. They would flatten you in a minute if you were up against them. They won the intramural league a few years in a row. And yet, after the game, he would always be willing to take people out and have a drink and laugh but there was that fire in him, which was, I think, critical for understanding who he was and who he became. So I just wanted to kind of start out by saying he was Charles Ogletree, always called Tree, no Chuck, as his email address was. It was like nochuck@AOL.com for years and years and years and years. But he was already a kind of fully formed person by the time he got here, which is kind of amazing. So let me kind of stop there and ask you, Guy, to pick up, the story about how you interacted with Tree and kind of how you're now thinking about Tree in this new role you have.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody and the folks who've organized this. Thank you to Professor Ogletree's family for being here. So my interactions with Professor Ogletree were actually less personal and way more professional. So I have to first think about the first time I interacted with him was really more watching him on television. And when I first accepted this job, one of the things that I also did was to go back and try to watch as many videos of him as I could, and then try to read as much of his scholarship as I could. I didn't get through most of it because that was just a lot to ask, because obviously he was a very prolific person. But it did remind me, as a young Black man, seeing this. In retrospect, when I actually went back and watched the videos, also remarked how young he was, seeing this young Black man command a room and in a way that I didn't yet understand or even fully appreciate, but was completely in awe of. So it was very distant to me. The idea of Harvard Law School, the idea of a Harvard law professor, the idea of this person called Charles Ogletree was just some it could have been on a very different planet in many respects, but was inspirational and aspirational, though the aspirational part was not something that I had yet fully appreciated, but the inspirational part was certainly there. So the idea of this person that I did not know, but was completely awed by, and the spaces that he occupied and the way that he occupied those spaces were, for me, totally incredible. And the thought that one day I would hold a chair. I mean, if you had told me, even Harvard Law School or the Charles Ogletree professor, that those things would never come. You might as well have told me that I was going to break the scoring record in the NBA, right? Right, sort of like an impossibility in many respects. So to hold the chair of a person that I admired, whose personal interactions were few, though when they did happen, they were warm and personal. But given the time period in which I came, it was mainly through his scholarship and through his public persona. And the scholarship, of course, as well as the public persona, I mean, what I also find remarkable, both reading Professor Ogletree, but listening to Professor Ogletree, he was so erudite and spoke, it just seemed to me, in complete paragraphs without notes. So I've watched many of his speeches, and they did seem like law review articles in some respects, but in a way that was so much more accessible. And so it was completely in awe of this individual who could command a stage and be thoughtful, direct, articulate, compassionate, but also demonstrate empathy, whose intellect was unclear display, but had a moral core to the work. I resonated a lot with his education scholarship. I was not a criminal law scholar, so a lot of that part of the work was stuff that I read mainly as a consumer, but the education work really resonated with me because I was coming at it from an internal perspective. And the moral clarity of the work, the way that he understood the places and spaces for action, the criticism of the work, of the court's work in particular, and the vision that he articulated. So all of those things were inspirations for me and my own scholarship and my own work. As I was coming through the academy, there weren't a ton of especially black professors and black male professors. We knew them all, those of us who were in law school in a particular cohort. And we read a lot of their work even as law students, and some of that we didn't even fully understand. And as an academic, I had a deeper appreciation for what he was trying to do, how he went about doing it, the degree of difficulty that he achieved to be able to stand in a room and to diagnose, to explain to various audiences. Some of them were legal, some of them were non-legal. That was interesting to me about watching some of his videos, but also reading some of his work. And then the fact that he, as Professor Wilkins said, what was fascinating to me is somebody who was always willing to build and do something at any time. There were a number of people that I've come across who said, I talked to Professor Ogletree and then something happened, right? Whereas I think if you talk to me, let's have another conversation. Let us consider this, right? But when you talk to Professor Ogletree, things happened. And he had not just an ability to convene, but an ability to see and to take action. And of course, we're the beneficiaries of some of that. So the Houston Institute for Race and Justice carrying on his legacy. So the number of the work that we are doing. We recently co-hosted a conference on anti-discrimination law and artificial intelligence as a way of rethinking both the past, so we're living in a moment in which our foundational anti-discrimination and civil rights laws are being severely undermined. There's not much left to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Pretty soon, an important aspect of our civil rights frameworks, the disparate impact framework, will come under attack. We are really seeing the dismantling of a type of a legal framework that we took for granted. And if Professor Ogletree were here, I know that he would write about this eloquently and engage students to think about how do we rebuild? How do we go forward? So one of the things through the leadership of our current dean, as well as our previous dean, we have a new clinic on race and law that is being headed by our fantastic clinic director, Michelle Leong. And part of that work is to do what Charles Hamilton Houston would do and what Charles Ogletree would do, would be to bring the best minds together and to think about how do you do advocacy and rebuild in this world, not to be caught from behind, but to anticipate what the problems are going to be and what the solutions are going to be. So one lesson that I've learned from Professor Ogletree is not just to think and work hard and to articulate and work through difficult legal problems and to write more law review articles, but to also be somebody when someone comes to that things get done. And so the Houston Institute is attempting to do that through the clinic, through our research projects. We have another research project on voting and voting rights, where we've been able to convene a number of different groups to, in fact, we're having another convening in April that's bringing a bunch of civil rights groups together to think about the future of voting and the future of representation. We are in the process of developing a plan for academic action, but advocacy. So we're trying to do our best to carry forth the legendary work that was inclusive. And I think this is the other part about Professor Ogletree's legacy, both in his writing, but obviously in his persona, is the inclusivity, the way that he drew any and all to, and his moral vision was capacious. And so part of the goal is to carry out that vision and to be as capacious. Now, there's a legacy there, and it's a legacy for a reason, which is when you think about what Professor Ogletree did and the too short time that he lived, it is absolutely remarkable, right? The ability to convene high and low, as well as middle, write books, do scholarship, build institutes, run a clinic, run Saturday school, right? Quite remarkable. But I think our task is to take the part of the legacy that is consistent with the skill set that we bring to the table. And through the Houston Institute, we're attempting to do that and rethinking what does racial equality mean in the 21st century, going forward and trying to think about the role that technology will force us to rethink our fundamental civil rights statutes, rebuild our voting and representational infrastructure, and to create a world that is fit for all of us to live in as equals with equal respect. And that is, for me, the lesson that I took from the person that I saw on television, remarkably still blows me over and gives me chills, but also the academic who took the academic work very, very seriously, and left a long-lasting legacy, and it is that legacy that we honor this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you. So, Julieanna, you are sort of a bridge between the real Tree, who we knew as a law student. You were here too, and then the Tree whose legacy you decided needed to be preserved in a way that it wasn't before. And I wonder if you could kind of tell that story of how you got from one to the other and the importance of papers,
Okay.
which we don't think much about.
That's right, David. We still have work to do with you. But today,
That was so clever.
but today is Trees Day, and I was in Davis Law School class of 1980. All that he said about Tree is exactly right. He was like the older brother who would put his big arms around you and tell you that everything was okay. I have a lot to say here, and I want to make sure that that I don't miss the opportunity to tout the archives, because the archives often don't speak for themselves. But I want to, Chris, I want to thank you, Dean Goldberg. I want to thank you and Dean Manning before that, who Dean Manning was wondering what was this former Harvard Law School grad poking around Harvard Law School's archives. And I want to thank you, David Wilkins, who, with the celebration of Black alumni, because it was the 2016 session that I started to really start poking around the archives and find out what the archives had. We only, up until Tree, his admission into Harvard Law School archives, we only had two, and that was Judge William Hastie and Clyde Ferguson, a very small collection of Hastie. And then there's, I think, one box that came of Cecil Poole, who is the one who was an early U.S. attorney, out of the U.S. Attorney's Office. But this here represents what now, I printed out, sorry, is a finding aid of Charles Ogletree. This is astounding that this exists. And I want to just speak to this because Pam remembers the day that I called. Pam did not know me, and I was calling Charles's his cell phone. And I said, please don't hang up, but I want to make sure that we get Tree within Harvard Law School's archives, and that that momentous day and what you and Rashida have done, that you did to make this happen, is extraordinary. It's over 500 boxes. It's the largest collection that the law school has of a Harvard Law School professor. And I know that we're just at the really beginning part of seeing what things Charles Ogletree will be doing to add to the intersection of law and archives. This is I don't want to say it's the first collection, but the law school is leading the way with digitizing first and processing second. This is legendary. In archival circles, this is viewed as you don't do that. But the law school and the project that I run now called the HistoryMakers are the two that are actively involved in digitizing first and processing second. The law school had actually, thanks to Ted Wells, who helped acquire when there was a massive digitization. It had a machine, a digitization machine, still has. It's now been donated to the larger Harvard University. that does digitize 14,000 pages in an hour. And so there's a lot going on in the archives, and I would be remiss not to acknowledge that. And Dean Goldberg, if it would be possible, $5 million that they could, if it allocated to them, that they could clear up their backlog. I just need to say that. So that's, Charles would not expect anything differently from me in that way, because he was a maverick in so many ways that a person could be a maverick. You know, there are people that are born brilliant, and Charles was born brilliant. You speak, David, of his humble beginnings. They're documented in the interview that we did of Charles. The interview actually began in August of 2003. It ended in August of 2014, over that 11-year period with a big gap in between. But he talks about his beginnings, you know, at Merced, where he comes to school and he is dirty. So they give him a bar of soap and clothes. And this is the person who was not thrown away by society, who went on to help those who were least of these. It was in his DNA. And the Charles Ogletree, who we came to know here at Harvard Law School, and his incredible brain, it shows that brilliance knows no difference in poverty and well-bred. It shows that you come into the world that way. But he took all of his time and effort to nurture and to help many, many, many thousands of people. And for this collection to be at the law school as the largest is incredible. In the collection, there's so much there in terms of his thinking, the cases that he worked on. Of course, he was involved in the whole reparations movement. And I remember when we were over at the Schlesinger and celebrating, or at least announcing, the Harvard Slavery Project, I wanted to jump out of my seat when Ruth Simmons talked about the fact that it was Charles's work on reparations that really forced her to look into Brown's history on its own enslaved history. That's extraordinary. You don't know the impact of this. And so we're literally just beginning today with the law school making this collection accessible. It is fully digitized. That means that you don't have to come into law school, not to say you don't come into the Harvard Law School archives. I would never advocate for that, or not going to see the wonderful exhibit that is up. But you don't have to go come into the law school. You can access it no matter where you are in the world. All of his writings, the cases he's worked on, his work on reparations, his work with Anita Hill, his trial advocacy work, the Saturday School, all of that is there. And in doing that, the law school here is leading archives all around the United States. In the last, I know we're running out of time, but I needed to get that in. I asked Charles about, his legacy. what did I, that's what we ask people when we end our interviews. And Charles said simple. He wanted people to know that Charles Ogletree was lifted up by others, and that he wants to lift up those under him to make sure that they enter the same way that he did, and they leave the door open. That's it, he says. It has to be that door open. And so now the doors of the archives are fully open. Take it from there.
Thank you, Julieanna. Again, this project would not have been possible without what Julieanna has done. Listen, we still have a few minutes, and I want to kind of take the conversation to two places and then encourage others to participate who know about these. I mean, one is Tree's career as a lawyer before he came to Harvard Law School. Because again, if he had only done that, he would have been a legend worthy of our celebration at this moment. Tree went to the Public Defender Service in Washington, D.C. Really the only job he ever wanted, I think the only job he applied for, it was his dream. And of course, why? Because that was the organization dedicated to bringing all of the excellence of the lawyers who were trained at the greatest institutions in the world, like this one, to bear on serving the needs of the people who are most in need of that representation and almost never get it. And he went there and he became a legend. So I was, again, sort of after I graduated, I eventually made my way to Washington, D.C. Tree was already a lawyer there, and he was already legendary because he was representing mostly juveniles accused of very serious crimes. And, those cases are very, very hard to win. And yet Tree basically never lost the case. Never lost a trial. I mean, just think about that, right? Never lost a trial. That would be remarkable in and of itself. But that isn't actually what Tree thought his most important accomplishment was. And I got to know this after he came back to Harvard Law School because he and I worked together on an article that he was writing about his time at the Public Defender Service. And what became very clear there was the cases that he did for those young people was just the beginning of his protection and intervention and mentorship of them. In fact, Tree would routinely, and Pam knows this, and I've always thought Pam was a saint for many, many reasons, but this is now one that's high on the list, is that Tree would give out his home phone number. Okay, remember there was no such thing as a cell phone, he would give out his home phone number to the kids that he was representing. And he would tell them, if you ever find yourself in a situation where it's late at night and stuff's going down and you shouldn't be there, but you don't know how to get out of it, call me. And they would. And Tree, Pam, would get in his car and he would drive out to Southeast or Anacostia or wherever it was that there was something going on, and he would pick the kid up. And if the kid didn't have any place to go, he would bring him home. And he would do this over and over again, right? Which was what he was trying to capture in the article, which was, it was beyond, that being a lawyer goes beyond, the legal formalities and the legal cases. And it goes to understanding the person. And that to do that, you had to not just be committed to the justification, everybody deserves a defense, critically important. But you actually had to feel it. You had to live it. And that was such an important lesson for what it means to be a lawyer. And to just pick up on Guy's project, in the age of artificial intelligence, machines are going to be way better at the technical legal stuff than us. They probably already are. But the one thing that they can't be is bring that humanity, that empathy, that those are the things, fundamental human qualities that we need to preserve. So that was Tree, the lawyer. And eventually, I'm going to let Charlie tell this story. Tree gets an offer to come and teach at Harvard Law School. Now, if you think that being the Charles J. Ogletree Professor of Law sort of feels like it came, out of Mars and it's like being in the NBA, I don't think Tree ever thought in a billion years when he was a student here that he would ever be invited back to teach. Not just apply to teach, invited back to teach, which he was. And he became a legendary professor here, as all of you know. But I'm going to tell one story about that very first class that Charlie was co-teaching and brought Tree here as a way, Charlie, to prompt you to talk about that, how that unfolded, and also some others here in this room. So I only heard this story years after it happened. Actually, it was at an alumni reunion, maybe a fifth-year alumni reunion from, a student who had been here, and she'd been in that very first class that you had been co-teaching with Tree. And it was like either the first or day or in the first week. And Charlie, who was one of the nicer professors even then, he's even gotten nicer over time, but he was very nice compared to some of our others. But, it was a very intimidating experience. And Charlie asked a question, called on this young woman, and she didn't know the answer. And, it's not that Charlie humiliated her, it's just she didn't know the answer. And there she was in front of her peers, first week of class. She sort of felt like she didn't belong there anyway. Remember, I told you how few women now were in 1984. There still aren't that many women. And Tree sees her, because he's sitting there watching the class with Charlie while Charlie's talking, get visibly upset and kind of, at the end of class, kind of pack up her things and leaves the room. And then this young woman says that she goes back to her room. She's confident that she's going to fail out of law school. It's like the old paper chase thing. Here's a dime, go call your mother, or say there's serious doubt you'll ever become a lawyer. If you haven't seen the movie, that's traumatized all of us with that scene. And she's confident that she's been exposed as a failure. And then, I don't know, about 5 o'clock at night, the phone rings. Again, remember these things? There were phones. She picks it up, and it's Charles Ogletree. He had found out her name, found her phone number, and he called her. And he just said, I know how traumatic that must have been, but let me tell you, what you said wasn't so bad. And when I was a student, I didn't understand what was going on either. But you'll get it. It's hard to tell this without crying. Think about that, okay? That woman carried that. She said, gave me confidence. I went on. I was a successful law student. I'm now a practicing lawyer and blah, blah, blah. That's Charles Ogletree. And it wouldn't have been possible if Charlie Nesson hadn't helped to bring him here. So Charlie, you want to say a few words about that?
How about a hand, shall we?
Yeah. Unaccustomed as he is to leading classes.
Thank you, David. I never heard that story before.
Wow. So it's again, he wouldn't tell you.
And I'm the villain in the story. aren't I?
Yeah.
I'm so proud to just hear all of this. It's like I helped bring Charles here,
Yes.
and I feel so proud that I did that. It's been something that has paid extraordinary dividends to me and to Fern, my spouse, as we've lived our life, and it keeps paying. It's like Charles was just the most natural, talented, present human being that I've ever known. And it was clear right from the beginning. He had the quality of being there with you, whoever you were, whether it was a jury or a classroom or elderly, scary colleagues or me. He was my friend. And to be a friend and to find a friend in Charles was one of the gifts of my life. And I'm just so pleased that you get to hear about him and share in the honor that you're paying to him with all the work that you're, Julieanna, amazingly doing. All right, so just a couple of stories. Well, seeing his quality led me to introduce him to Fred Friendly and this program in which he became a national figure. It was a remarkable challenge to have a room full of very distinguished people and interrogate them and draw out of them their opinion and place with respect to a hypothetical problem that was at a cutting edge in constitutional law. And Charles was remarkable at it. You saw the trial lawyer in him. You saw a person who was capable of engaging and pressing hard and being totally, I don't know, I'd say the word charming in doing it. It was not, he was never hostile. There was nothing hostile in him in the way he went about drawing people out. It's an extraordinary quality that many lawyers just miss and think that you gotta be somebody to put the other person down. That wasn't Charles, ever. I would say that the best thing he ever did for Fern and me was introduce our daughters, my oldest daughter, Rebecca, to Doc. My daughter, Rebecca, wanted to follow in her father's footsteps. I've gone to a prep school, so she went off to prep school, St. Paul's. Mine was Exeter. She didn't like St. Paul's. St. Paul's at the time was a kind of a strange place, and some of the things that evolved about what St. Paul's was still has currency. She said, "Dad, I want to go to another school." And I thought, well, not to another prep school. Let's see if she could go to Cambridge Rindge in Latin. Public school. And I talked it over with Tree, and Tree said, "Let me introduce you to Doc. Doc, I'm going to introduce Doc to you." Doc was what was your title? You weren't the,
I was the assistant principal for student services.
right. Well,
In charge of guidance.
Doc took my daughter under his wing, and she had a wonderful 2-year experience at Cambridge Rindge in Latin. And the result of it is that Fern and I were introduced to a Cambridge we didn't know. It was like learning about a whole new side of the Cambridge world, and it was terrific. The best thing that we did, and I'll ask Doc maybe to say a word about it, was Doc and Joyce, blessed Joyce, and Pam, and Caroline, and Fern. We decided that Cambridge needed a charter school that was geared to Black children. And we applied and started the Benjamin Banneker School, which is here in Cambridge, now flourishing, and is just a wonderful legacy to Charles. Charles was the organizer, really. He was the person who made it happen and got it through. And the rest of us had wonderful meetings in which we fashioned the proposal of articulating what we wanted and how we could imagine it coming forward. And to see it become real and to continue to this day is just, it's like a plaque on the wall for Charles, for sure. Totally wonderful. The other thing I want to tell you about is the story of Charles's tenure celebration. When he got tenure, we had a party for him. There was the place where I still live with Fern, at the time was down near the river, Hubbard Park Road, Sparks Street. Next door was Abe Shays' house. Next door to him was Jerry Flug's house. Next door to him, there was another one, and another one. It was like the faculty ghetto, in a sense. And it on the corner, our house, Abe Shays' house, Jerry Flug's house, in the middle between them stands a beech tree, which is on a map of revolutionary Cambridge. It is a most amazing tree. And there were fences, each of the 3 houses, that kind of cluttered up the area. And the 3 of us, Shays, Frug, Nesson, agreed to take the fences down and have a party under this tree. And so we did. That's what we did. And Tree got his favorite singer. I wish I remembered his name. I asked Doc, what was his name?
It'll come to me. Larry Watson.
Yeah. This was a guy who had a voice that was so loud.
Yes.
And he sang so loud with a backup band that was so loud that we got complaints from people on Brattle Street.
Yes.
So let me just end. I love Tree. He was my friend. I miss him. And Doc, come on up and say a word.
I'm 86 and I'd like to sit down, but let me say a few words
Here, wait
about
a,
how I met
wait a
Tree.
second, Doc.
You folks know about Harvard Law School. He had a great impact outside.
He did.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
sorry.
Doc, right here.
Oh, Charlie, can I stand here?
Yeah.
Yeah, hang on.
Just hand him the microphone. Thanks, Charlie.
Let me tell you how I met him. We're running a program for black students that are in the 5th grade at Cambridge. It's at the Cambridge Community Center on Callender Street. You should know Callender Street because W. Du Bois lived on Callender Street when he went to Harvard and got his PhD. So we're running this program, and one day, this guy comes in, and I never seen him before, and we're going through our morning devotional services, and I said, well, who are you? He says, I'm Charles Ogletree. Now, I knew a little bit about him because I heard about this black professor that they call Tree. That's all I knew. He came and was involved in that program and got involved in that program. And that was the program that eventually led to Benjamin Banneker Charter School. Because those parents and the proposal that we put together led to Benjamin Banneker Charter School that is now in its 30th year. All right. Let me tell you a story about Charles. This is very interesting. He bugged me because I was a golfer. Interesting. You said he's a football player. I didn't know he was football.
Yeah, that was his early on.
But he bugged me. He said, I want to be a golfer. I want to be a golfer. So I said, well, yeah, maybe. So the next week he comes in, he says, Doc, I got clubs now. And he was a lefty. So, I'm a righty, and he's bugging me about these clubs. Can you teach me how to play golf? So I said, okay, here's what you do. There is a course in Weston called Leo J. Martin Golf Course. By the way, it was just written up as the worst golf course in Massachusetts. But there's a road about the 15th fairway, and there's a road in back where I used to park my car and I'd hit balls. So I said, okay, you have to be there at 6 a.m. and bring your clubs and we'll hit some balls. I'll teach you how to play golf. I get there, so I figure, hey, he isn't gonna come. This Harvard professor, he's not gonna get up at 6. No. Sure enough, I get there, and he's there. And so I'm saying, wow. But what I didn't tell him was this. You had to jump a fence to get into the course to hit balls. Charles jumped the fence with me, and we hit golf balls. But that was the kind of guy. When he did that, I said, that's a guy. That's my kind of guy. We could show him around. The other thing I want to say is a funny thing about Charles. It's just a legal thing since I'm here at Harvard Law School. I once asked him, Charles, you defended some people, one person being the young lady in the Tyson thing, because my wife was a big fan of Michael Tyson. And he represented the young lady, Dershowitz, back and forth. His office was on 2nd floor, Dershowitz's office on the 3rd floor, so they just had to go back and forth in that trial there. with Mike Tyson. So I asked him once, what about Gotti? John Gotti. I mean, what's that about? How you going to represent? He said, well, I want to just tell you, everybody determines, everybody should have a defense. So you know that should really happen. But I mean, Gotti? He said, but then he looked at me and said, look, I never had to worry about getting paid. that was a pretty good story. No, in closing, let me say a couple of things, okay? There would not be a Banneker School without Fern, Charlie, and that young lady there. Stand up, Caroline, honey.
Here.
And Pam, well, I'm gonna get to Pam. And Charles and Pam. And Pam, would you introduce all the people that are here, including his brother, Richard? Because we haven't had that done. Would you stand up and just tell us a little bit about who are here?
Yeah, can you hand the microphone? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm very pleased to be here, and I have with me my granddaughter, Jamila Ogletree, and my granddaughter, Nia Mae Ogletree. They're the daughters of my son, Chuck, our son, Chuck. And I have Charles's brother here with us, his youngest brother, Richard Ogletree. So we're glad to be here.
So listen, as you could tell, we could stay here all day and we would just crack the surface of the Charles Ogletree stories, and we have an amazing program yet to come. So I'm just going to close by saying this. I was actually in the room, you were there too, Charlie, you may remember this story, when the faculty voted on Charles Ogletree's tenure. And you know, this was a relatively contentious time in Harvard Law School. There was always something to be said and people going back and forth. And at some point, and I was still pretty junior there, I had only had tenure a year or so before then, I said, hold on, just here's what I want you to know. When the history of Harvard Law School in the latter decades of the 20th century and the early decades of the 21st is written, I promise you that Charles Ogletree's name is going to be in the very top echelons of faculty members who are here. Now, I would say 90% of my colleagues looked at me like I had two heads. All I can say is, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can continue these remembrances and conversations at noon in Langdale Hall in the Casperson Room, also known as the Treasure Room, where we will explore this treasure of a collection. We're also going to have a panel of librarians come and archivists come talk now, so if you have time to stay, please do. Thank you again so much to our panelists, Professor Nesson, to Doc, to the family. We'll take just a couple minutes break and then we'll be right back.
Okay, shoot.
At the center of today's conversation is the concept of the modern manuscript collection, a living archive built not from the distant past, but from the papers, correspondence, photographs, and materials of individuals who shaped our world within living memory, as we so wonderfully just got to experience together. Professor Ogletree's papers are a powerful example of what's at stake when we make the decision to collect with intention. When libraries and archives diversify their holdings, they're not simply adding names to a catalog. They are making difficult decisions about the preservation of both individual and institutional legacies that will shape the historical record of a given institution, and that in turn will inform future scholars, students, and communities. The panelists you're about to hear from have each dedicated their careers to making that argument and to making it count. Our first panelist is Ed Moloy, the curator of modern manuscripts at Harvard Law School Library, whose work sits at the intersection of legal scholarship, archival stewardship, and community access. Ed brings deep expertise in special collections and has been instrumental in the care and development of materials that document the careers and contributions of some of the most significant figures in American law. We are grateful to have him here today and to share his perspective on the Ogletree papers and what this collection means for researchers and the broader legal community. We're also pleased to welcome Petrina Jackson, Leah Gelin Poorvu, Executive Director of the Schlesinger Library and librarian of the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. The Schlesinger Library holds one of the most important collections in the world dedicated to the history of women in America, and Petrina's work there reflects a profound commitment to preserving the voices and records of those who have shaped our social and political life. Her expertise in archival practice and her dedication to making collections accessible make her an invaluable voice on today's panel and just in our work in general. Rounding out our panel is Sarah Martin, Associate University Archivist for Community Engagement at the Harvard University Archives. In that role, Sarah leads efforts to connect our extraordinary archival resources with the communities those records represent and serve. Her work recognizes that archives are not merely repositories of the past, but living resources with the power to inform, inspire, and empower. We are delighted to have her here to help us think through what it truly means to unlock a collection. Sarah, your title speaks directly to the idea that archives are not built in isolation, but through active relationship with the community whose histories we're trying to preserve. Can you tell us about the work you and your colleagues are doing with student groups and alumni to capture their stories and bring their materials into the university archives? And I'm particularly interested in how those community engagement efforts, whether around milestones, anniversaries, or other moments of celebration, end up creating the conditions for collection building. How do you think about that connection between relationship and record?
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda. You hear me okay? Great. So thank you so much for welcoming me here today. I'm thrilled to be able to talk about the university archives and the work that we're doing in this space. As Amanda mentioned, I specifically work in the realm of community engagement, so that relates to our exhibition program, all of our outreach, special events, collaborations with other university partners and other library partners as well. University Archives is the principal repository for Harvard's institutional records. And what you said about, I loved what you said, that collections, that the historical record must be actively shaped, not passively inherited. And so much of our collections, in my opinion, over time, have been sort of passively inherited, not to discredit the work of my collection development and records management colleagues who do quite a bit to passively yet actively work very hard to inherit those collections. But because so much of our collections are things that are part of university property in that way, that they come to us to document the institutional operations of Harvard, what we have been trying really, really hard to do is to do more of that active work, to gather more materials that relate especially to what students are doing on campus, the work that our now alumni did when they were here, or other people that sort of pass through campus in a variety of ways, whether staff or in a more temporary manner, to fill in those spaces when it comes to the historical record, not just representing who works here or who's in positions of relative power here on campus, but also the people who are really shaping the social or intellectual history of campus. And that mostly happens through faculty and student work. So what my role really is in this community engagement space is to build relationships with those individuals while they're here or after they have graduated, to think about ways to bring those stories into the archives and into the collections and broaden the idea of who creates Harvard's history, and sharing with students that they too are creating and shaping the way that Harvard will be remembered for years to come. A lot of that is done through building trust, through patience and conversations over time, not sort of shoving ideas down people's throats and letting them come with ideas and what they want to do. I've had some of the most meaningful collaborations, for example, the Black Student Association, as part of the Harvard College, one of the student groups as part of Harvard College, actually came to me with an idea. They were putting together a arts showcase a couple years ago, and now it's become an annual event. And they saw it as an opportunity after some of their membership actually visited during a class visit for a class they happened to be taking, and realized that we had records related to the Black Student Association. They said, well, wait, can we come back? And I said, well, yes. And so we had a special curated visit planned for them so the membership could come in and see what the history of the association they are now a part of looked like several decades ago, and see how those records are similar or dissimilar from records they are creating in the course of their own operation as that association. I was able to work with current membership to build out this really lovely booklet that they were able to give out for free at their annual arts showcase so that people could understand that their legacy was being captured by the archives and see themselves in that. I think that's really important for students or individuals to see themselves represented in a history that looked very different in 1636 than the campus does now. And so it's just finding and building ways for that to happen. That might be through exhibitions. We've recently had 150th anniversary of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences exhibition. There's probably going to be one in the works for Radcliffe's 150th coming up. We also recently had an exhibition out celebrating the 125th anniversary of the Cuban Teachers Expedition of 1900, which was the first international exchange program that we know of in the country. And it was amazing to see, especially because it was up last summer, see in our guest book how tourists or people that we don't necessarily know that we're engaging with were engaging with these materials and seeing themselves on a campus that maybe they didn't know that they were represented in a variety of ways. So I could go on and on and on, but I am happy to talk with anyone about this, or if there's other follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer those. But for me, it's really just creating space to have open conversations, start a dialogue, make connections with my colleagues in collection development after we've been able to sort of build this foundation of trust and allow people to see themselves represented in those spaces. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that booklet now can go in the archive too. I had the wonderful experience of watching at our Black Alumni Celebration recently, alumni see their student work. They didn't even know it was in the archive, and they were like, oh, I did this with my friend. And then they brought their friends later to like look at the back of the booklets. And so it is that like seeing yourself represented and not understanding that you are part of the archive and then how that inspires the future. Petrina, the Schlesinger Library has long been recognized as a leading archive for the history of women in America, and yet the work of expanding and deepening that collection never stops. Can you tell us about some of your recent collecting efforts, the voices and stories you've been working to bring in, and what drew you to those collections? And perhaps broadly, how you think about the relationship between holdings and what it means for our collective understanding of American history? It's a small question. Who gets to be part of that story, and who's missing from that story?
Thank you, Amanda. So I want to give some context of the Schlesinger Library, some historical context, as well as go over our collection development strategy, and then highlight some recent collections that we've just acquired. So it's important to cover the context because it really is a North Star to our current strategy. So in 1879, Radcliffe College was formed as called the Harvard Annex, and it was for the purpose of educating women students. And then in 1908, several years later, our current building, I don't know if you all have been on the Radcliffe Quad lately, but the library, Schlesinger Library, is there, and that was the first undergraduate library for Radcliffe College. And then several decades later, in 1943, Maud Wood Park, who was an alumna of Radcliffe College, gathered her and her other friends primary source materials about women's rights, women's suffrage, and she donated it to Radcliffe College. And that became the core collection, and it was called the Women's Rights Collection, and it marked the beginning of the Women's Archive. And so the Women's Archive would later focus on women active in federal government, trade unions, and political organizing. And a couple of decades later, as the library grew, it was renamed for Arthur and Elizabeth Schlesinger. And Arthur Schlesinger Sr., not the one who was part of the Kennedy administration, but he was, although his son worked as a historian at Harvard College as well, he was a historian, but he was kind of cut from a different cloth of the historians of the time, who the mainstay was military and diplomacy, just kind of like things dealing with powerful white men. And he really wanted to focus on social and cultural history. And so he did. And so he wanted to, he focused on immigration, immigrants, the role of women in society, urban history, intellectual history. And those views actually marginalized him in his own profession because people were like, what? You know, what is that? And his wife was also a civic leader, a suffragist, and very active in Radcliffe College administration and the Women's Archive. So, rightfully so, the library was renamed for them. And really, this increasingly expansive view has followed the library, has guided the library, has been this North Star from the beginning. So from that, I'd like to just read you the key framework of our collection development strategy. It's a reparative one, meaning we are trying to center folks who have been excluded from the historical record. And so, quote, our current collecting areas are culinary history, equal rights and social justice, family papers, gender and sexuality, Radcliffe College archives, and women's health and reproductive lives. We acknowledge that the experiences of many individuals are inadequately represented in our collections. For example, women of color, women with disabilities, working class women, and gender diverse people. We aim to add materials to our collections to address these gaps and silences. As part of a strategic effort to include voices and experiences from communities that have been historically excluded from the archival record, we are prioritizing the acquisition of select materials. So that's the heart of our collection development. I want to share some recent collections that we had. If you can call, I guess it depends on your context and how old you are, what recent really means. But this seems recent to me, 2018. We we acquired Lani Guinier's paper. And as you know, yeah. And as you know, as stated in her memoriam in Harvard Law Bulletin, Guinier, the first African-American woman to be tenured in a monumental presence at the Harvard Law School, devoted her life to justice, equality, empowerment, and democracy. So we received her papers in 2018, and they include her work as assistant counsel to the NAACP's Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and materials related to her book, The Tyranny of the Meritocracy, Democratizing Higher Education in America, and much, much more. I just wanted to share a sampling from her collection, some quotes from a letter that she wrote to a journalist. Quote, if I can inspire other young people to commit their lives to the struggle, if I can give renewed hope to the many wiser and more dedicated fighters who showed me the way, then I feel comfortable in the context of the courageous efforts of many people working together and sharing my personal triumphs and perspectives, end quote. Another quote, I hope we can get a chance to talk about my experience growing up in a Black working class community, attending a racially mixed public high school as it approached the tipping point, and then being whisked away into an almost exclusively white, predominantly male, generally upper class college and law school, end quote. The final quote is, by contrast, my clerking and subsequent year in Detroit were personally productive, exciting times because I was finally in a Black environment where Black people, men and women, had some power and even more self-confidence, end quote. Her papers are currently being arranged and described, and fingers crossed, by the end of this calendar year, it will be researcher ready, so the public will be able to come and dig into her collection. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How much time do I have? Okay, good. Okay. So last year, we acquired the League of Women for Community Services records. And this is a different type of acquisition. It's a deposit and a collaboration agreement. It's a 25-year loan, actually, that allows the library, in concert with the League, to house, process, catalog, provide conservation treatment, to digitize, provide programming for exhibitions to their records. So the League was founded in around 1919 in Boston to assist Black World War I soldiers who were not getting enough financial assistance from the government when they came back from the war. And so the League broadened its charge to provide educational and charitable benefit to the entire Black community, and to cooperate with other agencies to that end. So it's one of the oldest operating Black women's civic organizations in the United States, and was home to Black college students, including Harvard's, who had difficulty finding housing and having cultural outlets during their stay. And it was also the home of Coretta Scott King when she lived at the League's 558 Mass Avenue headquarters, which still is there. It's magnificent, and it is being renovated, slowly renovated. If you want to chip in, let me know. I can contact you, give you the contact person. But she stayed there during her time as a New England Conservatory of Music student, and it's the same time that she became engaged to Martin Luther King Jr. So in 1964, the library acquired a very small set of those records from the League. And over the decades, the library wanted the whole corpus of their records. And honestly, it was very much a push-pull relationship. There was a lot of mistrust. There was a thinking that there was a miscommunication, I'll say, between some folks in the League, that once it got to the library, that only scholars could access the papers. Nobody else could touch them. And so it makes sense that they were very guarded about this. And so we had an exhibition on Black women in the archives, and we featured part of their collections, and we reached out to them to come to the opening of the opening of the exhibition reception, and to have a dinner with them later. And it started a relationship. It rekindled the relationship again. They had their papers at Simmons College, or University. Sorry for me. Simmons University. Oh, old. But anyway, and those records were there, not that they belonged to Simmons, but they were doing it for safekeeping. And so they contacted us later, and they wanted to preserve it was their most prized possession. It was a manuscript copy of Black Civil War soldiers' experiences in the war, and it was compiled by Black woman journalist at the time. So we agreed to conserve that. And long story short, we ended up coming to this agreement that we would take on physical custodianship and financial custodianship of your records, but you completely have ownership. Everything we do, we consult them about those records. We don't make a step without consulting them first to see if it's okay. And I have to say that the model that we used for this agreement was from Harvard College or the University Archives, yeah. And it is based on the Helen Johnson Sirleaf agreement that they had to the former Liberian president. And so we're really grateful to have those models, those collaborations across the yard, in order to make these things happen. I want to go quickly. I've written too many things. So in the past year, we've acquired papers of Poorvu, who was a UC Berkeley professor. She was a radical feminist, and she ended up being dismissed by UC Berkeley, and she took them to court based on political, sexual orientation, racial, and political ideological bias, and she won twice against them in 1984 and 89. What is really interesting about her collection is that this collection speaks to others that we have. So in her papers, we have correspondence between she and Angela Davis, or the poet Pat Parker, or June Jordan. So we intentionally acquire papers oftentimes that are in conversation with ones that we have. And the same thing has happened with, it's just been an immediate, I think last week, or Barbara Smith's papers. So Barbara Smith was a Black feminist, author, theorist. She was a Combahee River collective member, editor, all the things. Just a really profound influence in Black radical feminism. And we have her collection, and that's thanks to the to Harvard Library as well, because with the resources we had at the Schlesinger Library, and then the resources that we requested from our colleagues at Harvard Library, we were able to get that collection. And Mellon saw that we were really, really committed to getting the collection, and they ended up granting us a fund so that we can hire someone to, as a project archivist, to process that collection in 2 years. So it was just kind of like a beautiful coming together of things. And that collection is so amazing because it talks to Polly Murray, who we have her collection, so she's talking to an elder, states person about her experiences. And then it also has correspondence with Toni Morrison, whose papers are at Princeton, and Alice Walker, Emory, Audre Lorde, Spelman, and also Poorvu, whose papers we just got, and Adrienne Rich, whose papers we have. And it's just like a very vivid historical conversation that's being had throughout these collections. And that's part of what we do when we're trying to build these data sets, basically, in order to create really rich resources for people to have. I'll hush.
Don't, yeah, please don't. I'm gonna come back to something you said, but first I'm going to bring Ed into the conversation. Ed, Historical and Special Collections at Harvard Law School, we hold one of the most significant legal archives in the world, and the Ogletree papers are a wonderful example of our intentional work that's gone into ensuring that collection reflects the full diversity of American legal history. Can you talk about the efforts that HLS, Historic and Special Collections, has undertaken to diversify our collection, the kinds of materials and voices you've been working to bring in, and how you think about that work in the context of an institution whose historical collecting has, like so many others, not always centered those who have been marginalized in the law? What does it look like to change that, and why does it matter?
Thank you. It's an interesting transition. It kind of goes back to, I think, some of the things that have been mentioned in terms of, our collecting. I think when I arrived, which was 20 plus years ago, was very passive. I think our focus was, and still is to a point, collecting the papers of HLS faculty. And I think we've done a reasonable job, but the faculty wasn't particularly diverse, so the collection isn't particularly diverse. Our thinking on that, moving away and become more active or with intent, I think maybe we started having discussions and, kind of rethinking how we approach that. Maybe I could think back to 2015, where there was the vandalism of Black faculty portraits, and then the following year, I think, is when there was student activism about Belinda Hall and I think lack of diversity in the faculty. And then certainly the events of summer 2020 really accelerated, our thinking that, all right, we need to change and capture. This is really important to document what's going on and has been going on. But and so the changes would have been, they're fairly simplistic at one level, and that, obviously we were going to emphasize the prioritization of collecting marginalized or underrepresented groups, because in many instances, the groups have been there, but with our focus somewhat distracted, there haven't been the voices. And so we wanted to prioritize that and make sure that those voices were part of the history of the law school. And the voices, I think, when I talk about the voice, I think like the perspectives, and individuals to groups, say, student law groups or something, are going to have a different perspective on what's happening at the law school. And we want to capture those and represent those. And I think for a long time, we didn't default to that, but we started to become much more active. I think we did a project in 2016, 2017, it was called Community Capture, which was an effort to really go after student groups, because they're obviously an important part of life at the law school. And that was moderately successful. Students are hard to track down and get to commit to much. And it was a learning experience as well. I think another important thing, in terms of the collecting, has this changed volume or something? I've certainly tried to have more outreach and be a little bit more proactive in terms of having conversations with, a Black faculty or other faculty that we want to make sure, capture those voices. But that can take a long time, and a lot of folks, that's not a conversation they're ready to have. But I think one thing that we've done that has been very helpful, and it's kind of represented in the best possible way by the Charles Ogletree papers, is like prioritizing the digitization of these voices that we have. So I think it was mentioned maybe by Julieanna, but we've digitized the Clarence Clyde Ferguson papers, the papers of Judge Cecil Poole. I believe Lolita Parker's photographs have been digitized, and she was working with the Charles Hamilton Institute. And I think I might be missing one or two. But I think that's really great, because that provides much greater access to these voices and kind of elevates that a little bit. And obviously we're still we haven't completely redirected our collecting. We still have our it's still important to collect faculty. Well, we try to adjust it like that, so it's an interesting balance. But we continue it to this day. And this one too. Yeah, and then other activity, I mean, we've talked about a little bit, reparative description. We had one, I don't know if it was a benefit of, COVID, but we were able to take advantage of a student who's working with us and received a George A. Strait Minority Fellowship. And he did a pretty deep dive into our collections, looking for things that might have been missing or things that we should be alerted to that were potentially problematic, that, just always been there due to convention, I suppose, of the time. And that would just include language or inappropriate statements. And so that was really helpful in helping us direct our work, because there's a fair bit that needs to be reviewed and updated and potentially attended to. So that was really helpful. And it identified some gaps, which we kind of knew about students as one, and this is certainly across the board in terms of representing various communities that we would like to collect and add to the collection. And then, I think another one that was a project of mine that I was hoping to have it's a good outcome because it started, but one of the only experiences I had, I never met Professor Ogletree, but I was in the room with him once. I think it was the same day because it was a Charles Hamilton Institute event with William Coleman, a well-known graduate of the school. And so I've always wanted his papers. That's always been something, but I spoke with him briefly, and he was probably 90 at the time, so, but it didn't necessarily go well. And of all people, of course, I think we were talking about the activism of Professor Ogletree. He was a conduit, those indirectly, so it's like, I think it goes to speak to what Professor Wilkins and Julieanna and everyone else has said, but he was the one. But unfortunately, he passed away before much progress was made. But what we have now, I can't remember how this came about, but Donald Bliss, who's also a graduate of the law school, and I think worked with William Coleman at the Department of Transportation, and also went on to the law firm that they worked at in DC, And also, more importantly, I think assisted him with the book that William Coleman wrote. So we have a small collection of material from Donald Bliss. On the negative side, Donald Bliss said that he doesn't have papers, he did everything by memory. So, and I think that was a surprise to some folks. I know that some of Mr. Coleman's kids were asking, where's more stuff or something? So I think that's kind of the truth, but I think he's such an important person to have represented for many levels that I'm looking at other parts of our collection. There's a few files in like the Paul Freund papers that have some really good, valuable correspondence from William Coleman, which is great. So we're going to try and digitize those and try to piece together as complete a picture as we can of William Coleman. So that's just another effort. And I think that was something that I was really prompted to be more proactive with since 2020 or whatever we've had. So those are those are the exhibits. We've done exhibits to try and give a voice and do more outreach. We did an exhibit on the HLS Shield conversations and work. We had a collection querying the collection, the community capture, which was focused on students. And I think those are some of our activities, but it's definitely become kind of the new, and we did sort of write our collecting policy differently to reflect our new goals and what we're trying to achieve. So that's it for now.
I'm gonna rush through one more thing quickly, mostly because most of us have to go get ready for the exhibit at noon. But just very quickly, if each of you could name what's the greatest obstacle to you moving forward, just in a couple words. And this is inspired both by what you said and by you lovingly asking for $5 million for us, which we really need, Juliana. But I wonder if you could just name what's the biggest obstacle. Sarah, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think dismantling like a 400-year-old reputation is probably the biggest challenge. I think we're doing a good job. I think there was another opportunity maybe to talk about like the fact that we collect digital materials and how to do that. I think just advocating to others and communicating to others what we can do and what we want to do with the collaboration and partnership of others and just getting that word out and building that trust. I think it's not necessarily an obstacle, but perhaps our greatest opportunity. I think it's just demystifying what we do and that it can be collaborative and doesn't have to be so like we're trolls in a basement. We're like young and hip and technologically savvy.
Off in the basement, no.
And yes, maybe work in the basement. I have a window. No, I work at the ground level mostly. I think just like educating others and making sure they know that our intentions are good and that we want to collaborate and partner I'd like to think of it as our opportunity, not necessarily an obstacle, although it can be.
So a challenging opportunity or an obstacle. I'll go off Sarah's language. Is it money for you or is it something else?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was gonna say the 5 million would be a good start. And that's simply just because it's the law school. I mean, we all share the same issues. I'm not, co-opting this in any way, but, it's a small department, 6 people. And yeah, we really want to collect student records, but they're a moving target. And we dedicated 1.5 years of like a hired person on the grant and 2 full-time people dedicating a lot of time. And we had some success, but we lost the grant person and one of the staffers left, and that was that. We just didn't have any like backfill to keep up the momentum. And that would apply to any of these collecting
And the
activities.
student leadership changes every
Right, and
year
that changes,
or
right?
two.
You can have one that really
Yeah.
wants to do it, and then maybe they get busy at exams, so they
graduate.
disappear, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
And then you try and pick it up, and it's like a whole new conversation.
Restarting. It's
So,
like
right.
dating. It's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
exhausting.
yeah, it is. And that's just the one avenue that we're hoping
Right.
to, expand and fill in gaps. And then I would say that maybe this is more personal, and I am sort of the point person on collecting for our department, is that I personally need to get more out of this, old collecting thinking. And as an example of that, in preparation for this, I was wondering who was the first tenured woman law faculty here. And I didn't know, which is a problem, I think, I'm not even proud of. And then I found out it's a woman named Elizabeth Owens. And I looked in our records, we have no record of her at all, nothing representing her being here. And I think that's unacceptable. And so, but it took this event for me to like go back and think about that. And I think I need to be constantly aware to like try and think much more broadly and deeply about collecting and not get caught up sort of on the day-to-day, because we all have day-to-day too as well that can kind of slow us down and, get us into a rut in a bit, so.
I'm not even going to go into like a capacity, like with staff and financially speaking. What I would really, my strong desire is that all Harvard undergraduates know that we exist. Know that Radcliffe College existed. We're right by admissions, and sometimes they give tours. Well, they oftentimes give tours. And the one tour guide, after he talked about, admissions, he was like, oh, and nothing else to see here. And I'm thinking, you're standing almost at the steps of this library and you don't even know. It's just like how quickly things get lost to history, and they have no idea what rich resources or source of pride is right there for them. And the other thing, quite frankly, is this being recorded? Anyway, is that being a women's library and a library that focuses on gender, we're in a very precarious position right now. And there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of institutional fear that I think we feel the pressure and the heat of that all the time. And I just tell, the staff, just keep doing the work. Just keep doing the work. And I heard an activist say one time that sometimes you can't say the thing so you can do the thing. And there are many things that, about our mission, vision, and values that that have to be internal, because the specter of the outside threat is really tangible, to a lot of folks. Yeah, so I'd say.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think in some ways it's like middle school almost, like not standing out is the way to survive right now, but there's no way to do what we do well without standing out.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, it's just to keep doing the work that we're doing. So I want to close by offering my deep, deep gratitude to each of you for this conversation, because what you've shared today doesn't just reflect our professional expertise, which is very deep in this room, but a genuine commitment to the idea that archives are acts of care, acts of justice, and acts of faith in our future. And the work of building these collections reflects the fullness of human experience that's never finished and is so broad we're exhausted, but we want to keep doing it. And it's among the most important work any of us can do. Juliana, did you want to say something?
I just want to say something because I feel like I would be struck down. At Moloy, he and Kevin and Guy-Uriel did an amazing job. There would be no Charles Ogletree's collection. And what I want to say, just in terms of the compassion, the keeping at it, to making sure that it was done, the care, and you delivered on time.
Margaret? Thank you.
I think all of us would say that you're probably the biggest reason that those things happened. I've heard that said many times before I ever got to meet you, Juliana, that you were the reason that many of these things happened. So thank you. And I know how great it is, and glad to share him with all of you. I want to take,
Rashida.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Rashida Ogletree.
Yes.
With her care and thoughtfulness of how to approach the collection. I mean, those two people, if I got it, would be killed.
Yeah, and one important quick comment. I did want to thank, and it kind of touches on what you've been saying and what I think Sarah said about relationships, but I want to thank the Ogletree family again, because you just mentioned an act of faith. And I mean, it takes an enormous amount of act of faith and trust for a family or people to donate such a collection of a loved one,
Yes.
you want to trust in other people to take good care of it. And I
is.
really appreciate the
It is.
trust that they expressed, and
And
it's very humbling.
It's a pivotal moment for us because it opens so many doors for other people to give us an opportunity and have faith in us that we will treat their work well and unlock it, just as we've done for this. So it's such a major thing. And I also want to take a moment to thank the Ogletree family, whose generosity in entrusting these papers has made this day possible. It is a profound gift, and one that we receive with humility and a deep sense of responsibility to honor his legacy and make it available to the world to carry his work forward. I want to acknowledge the remarkable team here at Harvard Law School Library, whose dedicated work brought this collection to life and made it available to all of us. And more broadly, I want to express my gratitude to each and every archivist, librarian, and curator across Harvard's libraries and archives who bring this same level of care and commitment to everything they touch every single day. The richness of what Harvard holds is a testament to them, to their expertise, to their passion, and their belief that what we do matters. Collections like this one do not happen without countless hours of careful, skilled, and deeply committed work behind the scenes. So thank you for recognizing us. Thank you for this beautiful collection. And please join us in the treasure room in the Casperson Room, Langdale, at 12 noon, where we will celebrate this collection and see this beautiful collection in action. Thank you so much, everyone.